So the black lives agreed deferred. First, I would like to thank you all for coming, for participating in this foray on the holy ground. Hopefully we can generate some provocative dialogue and some illuminating insight. We did come to Dapper. Obviously, this is a timely discussion with what's happened in Tulsa and Charlotte, playing itself out on TV and social media. And what with this impending election that draws glaring contrast, Trump's latest proposal is that he's talking about doing a nationwide stop and frisk. And it's like, wow, private police state. And you know, it kind of reminds me of that piece where when they came for you, I did not protest, and now they come for me. When he was like targeting Hispanics and Muslims, I objected, but now that he's going police state on black folks, I'm offended, taking it personally. Police abuse is not new to us, but the video recordings have brought them into America's consciousness and forced America to confront our reality in much the same way that TV brought the civil rights movement into America's living room and forced America then to confront the apartheid of the South. Black folks have often been like a canary in the mine shaft of human rights in America. They've been forced to be a canary. These are trying times that not only will shape the future of black America, they will shape the future of America. Once again, we are standing at the crossroads. In the short time allotted, this panel will consider issues influencing African American struggle in these momentous times. The response of the Black Lives Matter as a movement, and the strategic posture of black America in the 21st century. Where do we go from here? Let me start by introducing my fellow panelists. Got Marcia Douglas, University of Colorado, author of novels, poetry collections, and I'm being tight with this because I want to leave room for dialogue. Author of novels, poetry collections, and a one-woman play. Her latest novel, The Marvelous Equations of the Dread, is scheduled for 2016. Carolyn Finney, University of Kentucky, writer, performer, cultural geographer, promoting cultural awareness in environmental issues and policy activism. Her book, Black Faces, White Spaces, reimagined the relationship of African Americans in the great outdoors, came out 2014. And Jovan Mays, National Poetry Slam champion, community outreach coordinator for Lighthouse Writers Workshop and director of Your Writing Counts, a Denver-based youth poetry program. We'd like to start with, if you have any brief introductory statements that you'd like to make about the issue.
Brief. Lock the door. Sorry.
I'm glad to feel it loose.
Okay. Well, I wasn't sure what I was going to say today, right? I still am not entirely sure. So I'm going to say a couple. Do I need a mic? No. I don't think so. So a couple of just disparate thoughts that I see are related. The African American Museum, the Smithsonian, opens this week. I struggle with the idea of black struggle because I'm really interested in resilience and actually being shaped and seen somewhat differently than always struggling. I think about Marshawn McCarroll, the young 23-year-old Black Lives activist that killed himself on the steps of the Ohio State House because he was so depressed. And really, when I think about, for me, a lot of times we talk about the violence the struggle, and really underneath all the anger, but underneath that for me is all the pain, the hurt, the sadness, the lack of belonging. When you feel like you don't belong in a place that is supposed to be your home, and you spend all your time and all your energy trying to convince people that you have a right to be here, that you're not unlike them in terms of your own humanity, and still 400 years later, people still don't hear you, generally. Generally. Let me stop there. Yeah.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
All right. So I thought that it would be useful to maybe just begin by reading the Langston Hughes poem from which our title is taken. What happens to a dream deferred? Does it dry up like a raisin in the sun, or fester like a sore and then run? Does it sink like rotten meat, or crust and sugar over like a syrupy sweet? Maybe it just sags like a heavy load, or does it explode? So Hughes wrote this poem in 1951, and it's interesting to me how, it continues to resonate over the years. And I feel that as Black writers, there's a way in which, whether wittingly or unwittingly, often we're writing back and forth in dialogue with Hughes, I feel. And one person which comes to mind right now for me is Claudia Rankine, and her book Citizen and American Lyric. And I read Hughes' poem again last night, and I was reminded of a passage in Rankine's book, which speaks to something of this explosion of the voice, and I'd like to share that with you, just a little excerpt. To live through the days, sometimes you moan like a deer, sometimes you sigh. The world says, stop that. Another sigh. Another, stop that. Moaning elicits laughter. Sighing upsets. Perhaps each sigh is drawn into existence to pull in, pull under. Who knows? Truth be told, you could no more control these sighs than that which brings the sighs about. And I'm skipping a bit. Words work as a release, well-oiled doors opening and closing between intention, gesture, a pulse in a neck, the shiftiness of the hands, an unconscious blink, the conversations you have with your eyes translate everything and nothing. What will be needed? What goes unfelt, unsaid? What has been duplicated? Redacted here, redacted there, altered to hide or disguise, words encoding the bodies they cover. And despite everything, the body remains. Occasionally, it is interesting to think about the outburst if you would just cry out. To know what you'll sound like is worth noting. And I like that last line, to know what you'll sound like is worth noting. And there's a way in which Black Lives Matter is that cry, I feel, this cry which Rankine is talking about, this outburst, and to know what you'll sound like. Something of a collective cry is what I would say.
Y'all got our own? I didn't know that. Let me give yours back. Is mine's working? It's about 2 years ago. I'm with a good friend. We're at the Denver Convention Center and we're watching Harry Belafonte speak. He's telling us this story about him getting to hang out with Dr. King shortly before Dr. King was assassinated. He says, Dr. King, man, you're passing all these civil rights acts, everything's amazing. What do you think? And the response that he told us from Dr. King was, I cannot shake the feeling that I'm integrating my people into a burning house. Now, that same year, in preparation for the 2014 National Poetry Slam, a teammate and I decided to kind of build upon this concept and create a poem. And in this poem, we found ourselves accessing a space of counter-violence, or trying to make an audience imagine what counter-violence would look like. This is prior to Ferguson, Missouri. And we are on the National Poetry Slam final stage in Oakland, California that year. And we do this poem that night. And that same night, Michael Brown Jr. Was laying down a pool of his own blood. And I think for me personally, I'm starting as a writer to investigate how can you expect to treat something like a caged animal and expect for it not to fire back? And the big question that we came up with in this poem, my teammate Theo Wilson and I, was, what is mercy? Because as a culture, there's sort of this expectation for African Americans to be docile and spectative as these sort of things occur. In particular, being someone who's from this area, from this region, where somebody could tell you their favorite craft beer before telling you about a black issue. It becomes a deep, problematic space when we start to find these things on our front porch.
Let's start with the elephant in the room, Black Lives Matter and police issues. What exactly do you think is happening now with Black America? And what role do you think Black Lives Matter is playing?
Well, I think it's important to kind of break down Black Lives Matter a little bit, right? We have organized groups, we have a hashtag, and we have several other kind of onsets of how people are kind of using this in their space. I think it has to be so different for people in different regions of the country. Here, when I say Black Lives Matter, I'm saying that to get white folks to empathize with the fact that Black Lives Matter. I don't think that that's the same in Baltimore. I don't think that that's the same in other places. I don't think it's an empathy cry as much as like a demand. And so I think it's important to kind of break it down, because it's not always just like so simple. But I know that this landscape is the landscape of people checking that thing down, hijacking its intention, and saying all lives matter or blue lives matter in the face of it, and then everybody sitting back down and waiting for the next black person to be in the face of in a pool of their own blood before they bring it back up again. That's how I assess it. So I think for me personally, the first thing to kind of break down when we say Black Lives Matter is what does that mean to us specifically? But I know for me in this area, when that is said, for me it's an empathy cry.
I would agree. I think you use the word demand, and I think it is a demand. And in what I was saying earlier, I also suggested that there's a way in which it's a cry. And I see it as a cry which harks back from centuries earlier, that this cry has been going out and gathering momentum and gathering urgency. It's a continuation of the struggle which goes back centuries. And now it comes to us as Black Lives Matter. It's also a demand and something, a cry, an urgency to awake America out of its stupor, is what I would say, or its sleepiness. And sometimes this notion of Black Lives Matter causes discomfort for some. But that discomfort is necessary. And I'm referring back again to something which Claudia Rankin said as well in a talk recently. She said something to the effect of, you know, it's easy for someone to hear about violence and oppression, and you think to yourself, oh, that's terrible, but then it doesn't do anything for you. And you go on with your life. And that's something often which comes with white privilege. You know, say, oh, that's terrible. And then you go on with your life and you forget about it until somebody says it again. But what is needed is, you know, something to wake one up out of the stupor and to create, you know, the discomfort is necessary, is what I'm saying. It reminds me too of what Jamaica Kincaid talks about when you enjoy your strawberry, and maybe you should just have a little bit of discomfort when you eat that strawberry. If you remember where it came from and all the workers which had to harvest it, right? And so it functions in that way, I feel, to awaken us from our sleepiness.
So a couple of things. I want to build on the idea of discomfort, and I also, Michelle Martin, I think last year, this past year in NPR, did a show about being uncomfortable, and she had the Nobel Prize winner, Svetlana Alexievich, I believe is how you say her name, who she wrote about Chernobyl. And a lot of people in her own country, particularly the government, were really upset with her because she was like calling out their business, right, to the world. And her response, and unfortunately I don't have the exact quote in front of me, so excuse me, but she said, I love my country. I'm not interested in it being comfortable. If we're comfortable, we're not evolving, right? So I really, I struggle with wanting to point out, because we're talking about very specifically Black Lives Matter and the experiences that Black people are having across the board, that level of discomfort that we have collectively lived with for a very long time, and the idea that we are all connected, right? So really, would you really want to sit next to somebody that you care about and know that they are uncomfortable and that you were doing nothing? Like, how do we make it so that it becomes about the relationship that we have? What has happened to the idea that if I am hurting, that means you are hurting too, or vice versa? And it doesn't mean I'm not interested in the All Lives Matter and how that is used. I think that's it's a way to make us comfortable. Right? And I think it's really incorrect when we look at a country that has been struggling with trying to understand what does it mean to be an American. When I think about the idea that Christopher Columbus came over here, he put his foot down, and I'm not saying the dude was a bad guy, right? But the narrative that got developed out of this country was based on his perception, his experience, and everybody else who looked like him. Not everybody else who was already living here, and not everybody else who didn't look like him. And that becomes the dominant narrative. So for me, it's not only about Black Lives Matter in that moment when somebody is killed and we see it on the television screen. It is everything else. It is all our structures. It's what we learn in school. It is what we see on the news. It's who we don't see. It's the stories we don't talk about. It's the people we don't talk about. It is everything. It's all those things you think are benign. The pictures that you see about the thing that you should want to strive to do, and who's in that picture and who isn't. I'm really interested in when all of that stuff starts to change, it would be really nice if we wouldn't get upset only when we see somebody die. People are dying every day. And sometimes people are dying because somebody shot them to death on the street. And sometimes it's a slow death. Right? It's a slow death. And how do we recognize when that's happening? When somebody loses the light in their eyes, right? What does that mean? And what does that do for the rest of us? I thought I didn't feel well today, but man, I'm getting
I think that I got to be a part of a program last year in Northern Aurora, and our goal was to work with young men, young boys, I should say, 3rd and 4th graders, whose school psychologists have came to this group to tell us that they are having dreams of being murdered. And I think for me, this is where I kind of place most of my stock, is into young people in the midst of all of this calamity going on around them, still initiating their value and not looking at themselves like a victim, which is a tall order at times, especially when you're working with folks who've been in very direct contact with this. And here's what I feel like has happened is that there's this narrowing of the degree of separation that's happening all across the country right now. And as much as we want to kind of keep that separation further apart, right? Keep that comfort, maintain that comfort, the narrowing sort of happens. And for me, as like an uncle to like a 2-year-old and a 16-year-old, like I cannot let them enter society with a victim-based pathology. Like you are in control. And I don't care what lurks in the night, you're in control. So that's the battle I'm trying to take on right now within this. Sometimes I feel like it's like when you try to take on Black Lives Matter as a whole, you also find yourself like a dead channel at fried. You know, it's taxing. That's the thing that I don't think folks realize when you're kind of called upon as some sort of community leader or somebody who writes about these issues and stuff. All of a sudden, like you wrote about this like 4 years ago with all of your body, and then you're at the same place. You haven't even made a step in the lab because it happens again and again, something else. And so I've chosen to really take this whole issue and take it home and really focus in on young people, especially young men, who I come across, like my nephews, that are really, really struggling. And I come home and see my sister at times, you know, kind of broken because she doesn't know how to navigate this. The fear that she has putting this person into a world that may sort of, you know, just erase this person, and I refuse. That refusal, to me, is the mainline battle of this. Is the mainline struggle that we're all kind of trying to figure out where we're going to place our value, our stock, our energy. But for me personally, it becomes inside the young people because I don't believe that anybody should grow up feeling like they're a target.
In that context, and think about what Carolyn said about the guy who how do you maintain without getting weary and discouraged and giving in?
I would say because it's about more than the self, you know, it's about the community, and also about the youth as well. So I agree, you know, that's the thing that can drive you and keep fueling you. You know, this is something that is bigger than one's own individual survival.
Yes.
Please use the mic. It's better to hear you with the mic.
Really?
Yes.
And probably for recording purposes.
We love your voice, but please.
That was the right thing to say.
Can you hear me now? I forgot what I was going to say. I was going to say, yes, that I agree as well that it's so much about the community. And I want to say that I don't want to make this about myself, but you know, it's hard for me not to talk from the I and understand that even. I know, I'm trying to. And I think there's a lot of internal work, right? So if we're not always relying on what's external to us to tell us who we are, right? And I think it's really important to have community and friends, and there's things I would not have survived without people that I know and don't know reaching out and saying, remember who you are, right? And that's really important. But I have to remember who I am, too, on my own. And I'm really grateful for the opportunity and the privilege to be creative, however that expresses itself, because that's often how I go to it, because it's a way I can put a little distance, just a little bit, so I can, you know, shake myself, but sometimes I'm just tired, and sometimes I'm just really depressed. I don't know what else to say, we're human, right, as well. I spend a lot of time just going around the country being asked to talk about this stuff, and I believe in it because I'm still incredibly optimistic about the possibilities of us as human beings. So I have to believe that there are moments when I'm just tired. Why do I have to keep telling this story over and over and over again? And sometimes I feel that way. And so how do I retain, we don't use words like love often enough, and what that really means: love of self, love of others, love of an idea. I was saying this to somebody up in Portland like a day ago or something, that, you know, I actually am so grateful that I was born in this country. I'm so grateful that I was born here at the possibility, at the dream of the country. I actually take issue with the idea of a dream deferred, because I don't like the idea of anybody deferring my dream, because that assumes you know what my dream is. And you probably haven't been listening to really know what it is to defer it in the first place. And that puts all the power in your hands, and I'm not interested in it being in your hands. Maybe if we work together on it, but that's something else, that's another story. I don't want to get emotional. I'm going to stop talking.
Let me ask a couple questions about strategies of the Black Lives Movement, and then I'm going to segue into like a larger strategic. But what is apparent from media is the protest aspect of Black Lives Matter, and that's a large part of what makes some folk uncomfortable. But then you look at, you brought up Martin Luther King, who protest was his thing, and he was jacked up for it then, but look at him now. And protest as disrupting the status quo is, but one, do you have anything to say about the strategies of Black Lives Matter, the overt ones and the ones that are not so overt, that perhaps don't get on TV because they aren't clickbait? What do you have to say about the strategies of Black Lives Matter? Anything?
Thank you. Thank you for those strategies. That's what I have to say about those strategies. That every place has a diagnosis that they feel like there are things that you can impact. Again, you know, I think thank you for the willingness. I think the comfort thing, it just keeps coming back to that, to try to make people feel uncomfortable, and that's the biggest thing that I think is at the helm of the strategy, is disrupting that comfort. I remember for a while in Denver here, and this probably happened all around the country, that folks who kind of identified as being pro-life would put these giant pictures of like baby fetuses like on the corners of the streets, and it made people feel uncomfortable. And I think about this all the time, how we watch these videos and we forget that like that's like someone's father, like that's like someone's son, that's someone's daughter, right? You know, that's someone's auntie. We're able at times with these movements to disconnect and separate ourselves from the fact that this thing is like so human. And I think that's what I like about Black Lives Matter is that it's an effort of registry to try to remind us of how human this actually is. But as far as, you know, the different types of protests that are happening all across this country, I know the ones that are happening in Denver, and I am very happy and pleased with the way that those efforts are working. I love the fact that people are coming into malls and making people feel blissfully uncomfortable on Black Friday. and reminding them of where their dollar is going to and the things that they're ignoring that are happening on inside of their country. I think that these things are great strategies.
My question, what's the next step? What's the next step? And I mean, it's not like you've got to get the answer for it, but what's the evolution of the script? Let me ask this. Trump has said that Black America is in a state of acute despair. Based on our reading, well, one thing I'd like to know, what do you think the evolution of Black Lives Matter will be? And what's the next step? But I'd also like to open up just what is the strategic posture of Black America in the 21st century? What are our goals as a people?
Dang.
Well, I don't want to keep it just on Black Lives Matter. If we're talking about what's the goal? What are we trying to achieve?
I'm not really going to answer that one. But I want to go back to something you said about the separateness, the idea that we can watch something on television and we see something happen, but we're kind of separate. So, I spend a lot of time talking about these issues in relationship to the environment and asking the question about sustainability, because we're always saying, I get really, sustainability, that word gets used over and over, and I'm always asking, what is it that we're trying to sustain? So, do you remember about a year and a half ago, there was a white man from England who was named Ian Gibson, who was elephant sport hunting in Africa, and he got gored to death by an elephant. There were some Americans there with him, some Black African guides as well. And so I remember reading when that came out, I was reading it in some newspaper, and then I love to read the comments. You get sucked in by the comments. By the end of me reading all the comments, I was in tears, because all of the comments, except for one, were basically saying he got what he deserved, 1 point for the elephant. It just went on and on and on. And I looked at the picture of this middle-aged white man. We seem very different. I do not support sport hunting. I love the elephant. I also love the camel. I love the elephant. And I thought, he's somebody's father. He's somebody's son. What a horrible way to die. I can't even imagine that he got gored to death. And I said, is that what we're trying to sustain? So I had to look at myself and say, I have to see him as part of me, like in relationship to me. I have to be able to feel empathy and connection for this man, and actually look at the system that made it okay, that he thought it was okay to go sport hunting so he could put a couple of tusks on his wall, right? What is it that made it okay for him to do that and have his picture taken proudly? I'm more interested in that, but he's not really separate from me. So when I think about this idea of separateness, as long as we continue to feel separate from each other, we are always going to be able to distance ourselves and keep our comfort intact, and nothing actually ever happens. We come back to this conversation over and over again. So for me, part of it is, I cannot speak for collective Black America. I can speak for myself in thinking that, what is the internal work that we need to do? How do we separate ourselves? What can we do differently? What do we keep? We are not perfect either. We are not perfect either. And so therefore, and who is we anyway? And let me just say this, and then I'll stop talking. So I'm adopted, so I have this thing, identity drives me, this idea I don't have a sense of who I am. And I was raised by Black parents, and I call myself Black, and the little bit of information I had, I always thought, so because I was a Black biological mother who gave me up, and I knew all the story, blah, 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 blah. And so I decided to do a DNA testing. I just got that information back in the last week and a half. My shit is raggedy. Because the mitochondrial, the maternal line all the way back, there isn't a single drop of African blood in the maternal line. It's like Finland, Austria, the British Isles, and the brownest thing on there was Turkey. Now there's African on the other side, but I just want to say to you, so I've been really, it has really upended my own sense of self, right? And so also the diversity within, like what does that mean? How do I hold it? I can't pretend that I am only all Black. I'm the other thing too. he could be related. And I have to hold that too. There's a responsibility I have to that too. I'm complicit too. So I'm wondering, how do we hold that tension, which for me is just a representation of the larger tension we hold between us as separate human bodies. Does that make sense?
Yes, absolutely. So one of the issues of the 21st century is obviously racial identity.
Yeah.
Because people are mixing.
People have always been mixed.
There are very few black folk who don't have white folk in the family life. So you look at Obama, and the fact that it used to be you had to be black, but now you choose to be black if you kind of want to. Clarence
President
Thomas.
Clinton is black.
Yeah, right. So and the world is like globalizing and constantly shrinking and just fusions. So what the question of racial identity, and obviously the biological determinant of racial identity is kind of not sufficient. So apparently I think that it's about which cultures survive and influence the future, and which ones wither and die away. Which for me raises the question of that you said of we have to evolve a culture that is illuminated and empowered, one that people wish to emulate. I remember when African American struggle was everybody used African American struggle as their, it was just a platform for struggle around the world. Now we're known for gangsterism. So the question is, how do we make African American culture one that will thrive in the global future and the interstellar future?
Interstellar Star Trek.
Yeah. Anybody? And I have another question. Based on what you were just saying. Because African American intellectuals, black intellectuals, we are often faced with, do I speak for black people or do I speak for all humanity? And all humanity is the strong move, but you can't leave black people defenseless and leaderless. So how do you work with those tensions?
Maybe we sometimes make things more complicated than it needs to be.
Mm-hmm.
And it's my feeling that if you speak for the black community, then you're also speaking for humanity. If you strengthen the black community, you're strengthening humanity. Because as Carolyn has said, we're not that separate, right? And I think that this is, in my mind anyway, it's a healthy and positive approach to take. I feel that if we look at all of the great activists over time, Martin Luther King, Mandela, Gandhi, they understood something of this, that if they strengthened their own community, that it would impact the globe, and the globe would come along, hopefully, or learn something along with them. So, in my mind, I don't trouble myself too much to think about, okay, do I need to support humanity first or the black community first? I feel that if I strengthen home and community, then I'm strengthening humanity anyway.
I mean, and y'all, black folks are models of survival. The victory has already, in my opinion, been set to a circumstance where it's as if I look at so many folks in my own history and everybody who I know who's black has had some experience of some outstanding survival, some escape skills, some ability to be squabbed down to nothing and work with that nothing to make it into something. Like, there ain't a whole lot that I feel like we need to prove to humanity about blackness. But I'll tell you what, I will celebrate it all the time. I'll tell you what, I will let my nephew know that when Richard Sherman wins a football game and his neck gets twisted, that you can twist your neck the same way if you want to twist your neck. I will let you know that when I sit down with my dad and we start talking about Hendrix and Parliament Funkadelic and whatever he is, that like black folks are to a degree are their own form of alien, that we have created some things inside of humanity that will never be duplicated and that are supremely Smithsonian worthy.
I had the sign put up for me. We got about 10 more minutes.
No!
Yes. Question and answer, so it's not done. But I have one more question I'd like to ask before we get shut down. Basically, we're all writers, artists, intellectuals, academics. It just so happens that everybody on the panel is also an activist, but we are essentially book people. How do ideological orchestrators such as ourselves effect true change in the world? Is the work enough?
That depends on how you define the work. So, where's my microphone? It depends on how you define the work. I actually don't, people talk about finding balance in your life, and I just don't buy it for myself. And balance actually is not where the interesting stuff really happens. The interesting stuff that emerges happens on the edge, happens when the tension is thick. And I mean tension as that good energy, that we need tension. A butterfly doesn't become a butterfly without tension, right? When it breaks out of the cocoon. So this idea of the tension is fun for me. I love the idea of work, not a job. I love the idea of work. It's what I do most of the time. So if I think of, can work be enough, then it can be. If every moment of practice of your life, it's about your awareness to that moment, it's about your intention, what you are called to do with each moment, and thinking about all those moments building on each other to creating that work, which is your life, then it can be enough. As long as, for me, you're 100% invested in that. But,
For me as a writer, the writing is the activism. And what I would say too is that I feel as a writer that I think a gift needs to be passed on. And that as a writer, I need to pass this gift on to others. And when I say that, I think that it has to be beyond, I teach at a university, so it has to be something which goes beyond academia. Lewis Hyde talks about the urgency of passing the gift on, because there is power in words, so you have to empower others with words as well, and you also have to find a way for those words to be disseminated and to get out there in a grassroots way, is what I would say as well.
Yeah, I mean, I just think, for me personally, as a writer who writes heavily about these subjects, the biggest thing that I try to do is again, take things home. I have poems that are a lot of reimaginings. Imagine what it's like at Michael Brown Jr.'s household on Thanksgiving, and then makes you think about what your Thanksgiving is like. And I think that sort of movement is what I try to aggressively kind of handle as a constructor of the art, is things that actually make people have to reimagine what's happening. But additionally, I run this program in the schools, and I see almost like 200,000 kids a school year. And I'm going to come into some environments where some environments that are majority white need to feel that discomfort, and those black students, when they hear these poems, the comfort that they find out of nowhere to be able to at least feel like they can now have space for their statements inside of this place that they didn't feel like they had statements in, that's where I try to like hang my hat on and be in defense of folks, so, yeah.
Basically, I'm, as moderator, I'm not making too many statements, but it's an issue that's been with me for many years. I've been involved in quite a few, I've been an organizer. And I've also been involved with quite a few organizations where the soldiers would look down on the artists and intellectuals. And when I was young, I was susceptible to that. But I'm not susceptible to that anymore. I look at, and I'm always trying to tell because I have activist students that I teach, and they're like, oh, writing is not enough, and I got to get out there. And I say, yeah, you got to get out there because that informs your work. But it's the work that you got to do. I look at years of activism. I look at years of struggling with the page, and it's my work that will possibly change things. I don't begrudge my activism, but it's my work that I believe in. So are we open to, we're open to questions?
Yeah, may I ask a question?
I'm afraid. Go ahead. Go ahead.
So I have spent various phases of my life in the US. Since I was born, which is 50
Do
years
you
old.
want?
Can you hear me? No. So what has been puzzling me? I lived in the US as a child in the 60s and then as a college student in the 80s, and I've come back now. What really makes me very curious as someone who has observed this country from the outside and who truly believes it is the most, as Carolyn said, a country in which you all are fortunate to be born. Because really still, despite all the ills that afflict you, you are way up there in terms of setting an example to the rest of all of us. And we all tend to look to you for that liberal principle, the ideal principle of how humans should treat other humans. So what really makes me curious, and this is a question to all of you on the panel. When President Obama became president, and he got re-elected, so we've had 10 years of him, honestly I thought some sort of integration and a unification and the separateness was ending. So when I came this time, I'm shocked to see how apart the communities have become, when in the 80s they seem to be coming closer. So I have two questions to the panel. One is, what has caused this in the last 20 years? Is it just the police violence? Is it something else? And my other question is, to some extent touched on, what would be the marker that would make the African American feel and the white American feel that they belong together as one country and don't feel the separateness?
How many weeks do we have?
You can come to India and help answer that question.
Ask the first one again, say the first part of that question.
So what has happened in the last 20 years, even despite President Obama's being president, having a black lady as the first lady, there's still this tremendous separation.
I got it. It hasn't been about the last 20 years. This has been going on for 400 years. So I think for me, part of the fallacy is, because we have social media, we have so many more TV channels, there's a lot of stuff we're seeing, it's been happening anyway. That's the whole thing that trying to tell everyone, this has been happening. Black men have been getting shot by the police for a long, long time. And I really wish I could remember this. I took a tour of the African American Heritage Site in Boston, and the ranger talked about, because you had a lot of abolitionists there, that those days when if you could escape, or if you were black and could escape slavery and then you could go to Boston and be free, there was some deal made in Congress and some law at some point. You could be a free black person sitting on the street and anybody could pretend that they were the sheriff or the police and take you down. Like, we've been doing this for how many hundreds of years? And I'm sorry, but President Obama is not the magic pill. I mean, I'm just saying it like that in dramatic fashion. Really, it was like, this whole idea about the burning house, the first quote you said, He got elected into an already damaged office, right? There was already a structure in place. I kind of felt sorry for the man. Because you're going to change it, good luck with that. I knew that wasn't going to happen. I mean, I think he's handled himself probably as well as he could handle himself, right? And still keep himself fairly intact because it's a damaged system. So we're just seeing more expressions of it, but actually it's always been there.
I was just going to say quickly that, having a black president and black first lady, it's not necessarily the answer to the problem. It's just, something of putting a nice cover on the book, but it doesn't mean that the book is good.
Yeah.
And I think that what really needs to be done is I think this goes back to something you were saying earlier, Carolyn, about some healing of wounds and something of an internal work and healing that needs to be done for both black and white communities. I think that's the healing that we need.
I'm gonna go partisan on you. Ever since the right wing has been in ascendance, they have Fox News, they have degraded the public dialogue and nurtured resentment and anger and just all kind of deplorable activity. And so this has been they've been winning, they've been losing. They've been upset because it feels like, there's all this diversity, all this moral, relativity, and we got a bunch of fundamentalists that are bad at the Taliban. And so that's been going on since Reagan. And it's just been getting worse and worse, and the more trouble they get in, you got them repressing the vote, something that was considered shameful in the 60s. They do it with no shame. And that's just one, it's just all of it. And the fact that Obama was elected just made it worse for them. Yeah. And if Hillary gets in, oh my God. It's like they're going to be mad and taking it out with the whole gender issue. So it's gotten worse, because of the fact that it's getting better.
I just feel to a degree that even I exist with this thing that I like to call sometimes black privilege, where there has been this sort of nibble of the pie that black folks have achieved, and therefore we start seeing other races that are looking for that sort of recognition, right? I could go into almost any institution that is predominantly filled with brown students right now and ask them who's there, Martin Luther King, right? Or ask in the Asian community, who's there, Martin Luther King, right? There is a huge separation of how we sort of deliberate things, and I feel like this facade of patriotism has allowed some access at times that when something like 9/11 happens, we all think we're in some sort of brotherhood together, and then 5 years later we realize, oh snap, it's still the same thing, right? We've been sort of pinned under this this great ideology, and I call it the Apollo Creed, right? You see the man in the American flag, the black man in the American flag, right? And all of a sudden, when this Colin Kaepernick stuff went down, half the NFL were a bunch of black men in American flags. No, I would never sit down for the national anthem. And this other half is bro, are you serious? You fell for this? This fairy tale called America? You fell for that? So that's how I sort of kind of see it. I believe until that level of patriotism starts to really seek its definement, and thank goodness for Colin Kaepernick and this movement, because it's making people have to question what we're actually doing when we hear the national anthem and what that means to us. And when we can apply a why, When we can apply a reason to what that actually means to us, that we know, that we believe in, that we rest our hats on, that we don't just take some, like, you know, stand up and put our heart over our chest just and stand in order. When we know what that means to us, that's when we might see that divide start to come together a little bit. But until then, we're still just going to be our honorable selves standing at attention.